Hey yo, what's good everyone? Twisted here with the Open Sorcery, and today I want to go ahead and talk about pain bodies and how traumas can exist as egregores. To go ahead and expand upon the previous video that was made however long ago about thought forms. Now, to generally go ahead and speak on the pain body, it's a term and concept coined in the 2005 book A New Earth, Awakening to Your Life's Purpose by Eckhart Tolle. And, I read both this as well as, his most popular work, The Power of Now, just a little bit more so than, a year ago, I'd say. Doing it with a group of friends and, finding both texts to be pretty damn good, in my opinion. Now, over the course of his whole bibliography, right, Tolle goes ahead and talks about spiritual nature of the ego in of itself. And to go ahead and describe the ego, right, for those who don't necessarily understand it, I'll go ahead and use a quote from Terence McKenna, who's known for being rather outspoken about many different subjects, but particularly psychedelics and utilizing them to go ahead and understand yourself even more so. But in regards to his own wording on the ego itself, ego is a structure that is erected by a neurotic individual who is a member of a neurotic culture against the facts of the matter and culture, which we put on like an overcoat. It is a collectivized consensus about what sort of neurotic behaviors are acceptable. Now, in having that sort of definition provided by Mr. McKenna, let's go ahead and try to expand the scope of an individualized ego that is instilled upon us from, womb to the tomb, from day that we're born, essentially, into a more so collective ego that we can go ahead and adapt or, possess whenever we get into groups and have that sort of groupthink, the mob mentality in many cases. When a lot of people get riled up and say, have outrage towards something without even consciously thinking about it, for better or for worse, depending on what exactly it is, rightfully or wrongfully. But to go ahead and quote Tolle specifically himself on page 78 of his book, A New Earth, he states, "A collective ego is usually more unconscious than the individuals that make up that ego. For example, crowds, which are temporary collective egoic entities, are capable of committing atrocities that the individual away from the crowd would not be. Nations not infrequently engage in behavior that will be immediately recognizable as psychopathic in an individual." Now, taking that definition understanding, let's go ahead and kind of dig a little bit deeper and expand a little bit more so to go ahead and actually tackle the subject of pain bodies themselves. So, on page 88 of A New Earth, Tolle states himself, "The pain body, however, is not just individual in nature. It also partakes of the pain suffered by countless humans throughout the history of humanity, which is a history of continuous tribal warfare, of enslavement, pillage, rape, torture, and other forms of violence. This pain still lives in the collective psyche of humanity and is being added to on a daily basis, as you can verify when you watch the news tonight or look at the drama in people's relationships. The collective pain body is probably encoded within every human's DNA, although we haven't discovered it there yet." So this very much includes, whenever any of us happen to become parents or aunts, uncles, any sort of elder family figure, or say a teacher, any sort of politician, whatever the case may be, us imposing these sorts of societal norms or, different rituals, different sorts of what is right, what is wrong upon our children. And thus it carries over into the next generation, and so on and so forth. Now, as I alluded to in the beginning of the video, and was described in a previous one, there's a concept of thought forms. And very much pain bodies are in of themselves thought forms, from a spiritual perspective. So for those who are unaware of what thought forms are, in short, thought forms are consciousnesses generated by the mind and associated to energy, existing intangibly. Collectively spawned and powered consciousnesses are regarded to as egregores. They can be constructed for beneficial, neutral, or detrimental purposes, both good and bad, light and dark. However, in the case of pain bodies, they more so align with negative influencing humanity, them negatively influencing humanity as a whole, and the dark aspects that we all have within us. And, just let it sink in for a moment that, it's something that we passively do. We actively contribute, to these pain bodies. We don't even realize it, So whenever we go ahead and repeat the actions, like say, for example, I don't know, you had a father or mother who got angry at you for the slightest sort of thing, right? And then whenever you become a parent or, aunt, uncle, whatever, you go ahead and become very angry at your children for the slightest of things, because that's what you went ahead and had it done unto you when you were growing up. You use the adage, hurt people hurt people. The same thing applies to say when people get bullied in school, right? When there's a bully and they're going ahead and, making you feel like a piece of shit and, just all that sort of thing. Why is that? Where is that coming from? Is it because they simply just like the enjoyment of it and that's just inherent in their nature? Nah, it's probably because they were hurt themselves. Whether it be at home or at a previous instance in life before they got to that point and it's not necessarily currently ongoing. Something to that effect. But yes, that pain body is something we're continually giving energy to, whether we realize it or not. And thus, through magical spiritual means or therapy or whatever sort of manners that we have capable to use as tools, we can go ahead and work upon separating ourselves from these pain bodies, going ahead and releasing those traumas, releasing those negative things that exist within our core and not necessarily identifying with them as such. And to go ahead and paraphrase a quote that I happened to see on one of those, self-help, motivational sort of pictures. God knows how long ago I saw it. It was several years ago, and I keep going back to it every so often. But pretty much the premise, the sense of it is a sage asked the question, what is anger? And thus, he stated, it's pretty much you punishing yourself for someone else's action that is imposed upon you. And, in order to go ahead and rectify that, being able to accept whatever action it is, come to terms with, whatever action occurred, I'm the one who is going ahead and allowing this to affect me in a negative manner. Whether it be a pre-existing pain body or something that is more so momentary, whatever the case may be. You have to release that. You have to let go. You have to forgive yourself and, of course, the other person if they deserve it. But in forgiving someone else, it's not necessarily done for their benefit necessarily. It's done so you can get it off your chest and remove any associations or ties you have to said action and the effects imposed upon by it. Now, to move forward, so why is it that I went ahead and was like, I want to talk about pain bodies? Well, at the time of this recording, the album Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers by the popular and I would say pretty elite rapper Kendrick Lamar, it's been out for about a day or so. Today's May 13th, 2022, the time that I'm recording it. And it's been out for less than a day. And pretty much listening to it, right? He actually references Eckhart Tolle specifically and his, different aspects of his overall works and such. And I believe that they went ahead and had a teaser video, like a little snippet of like a teaser, back when he launched his creative management company, PG Lang, which I believe stands for programming language. And there was like a shot featured where it was Eckhart Tolle and Kendrick Lamar sitting there and such. So, whatever that was, finally went ahead and manifested into, this album coming to fruition. And throughout the album, as Eckhart Tolle is renowned for, the subjects of the ego and the pain body are discussed throughout, and particularly addressing the collective pain bodies of both women and Black Americans. So to go ahead and reference Tolle himself on these two particular subjects, here we go. We have on detailing the pain body of females from pages 95 to 96. He writes, almost every woman has her share in the collective female pain body, which tends to become activated, particularly just prior to the time of menstruation. At that time, many women become overwhelmed by intense negative emotion. The suppression of the feminine principle, especially over the past 2,000 years, has enabled the ego to gain absolute supremacy in the collective human psyche. Although women have egos, of course, the ego can take root and grow more easily in the male form than in the female. This is because women are less mind-identified than men. They are more in touch with the inner body and the intelligence of the organism, where the intuitive faculties originate. The female form is less rigidly encapsulated than the male, has greater openness and sensitivity towards other life forms, is more attuned to the natural world. And, he goes on to further elaborate on the male and female dynamics of that within that particular section. Now, moving on to the racial pain body of Black Americans, being that, Kendrick Lamar, over his discography, goes ahead and talks about these sorts of things quite a bit. Tolle himself notes on page 99, in Black Americans, too, the collective pain bodies pronounce their ancestors were violently uprooted, beaten into submission, and sold into slavery. The foundation of American economic prosperity rested on the labor of 4 to 5 million Black slaves. In fact, the suffering inflicted on Native and Black Americans has not remained confined to those two races, but has become a part of the collective American pain body. It is always the case that both victim and perpetrator suffer the consequences of any acts of violence, oppression, or brutality. For what you do to others, you do to yourself. And that particular ending part right there, I find it rather telling, rather important that Tolle goes ahead and notes that, both the victim and perpetrator suffer the consequences. And for what you do to others, you do to yourself. That reminds me of the infamous golden rule from the New Testament of the Christian Bible, where, I'm going to paraphrase here, Jesus Christ, Yeshua ben Yosef, goes ahead and states, do unto others as you have done unto yourself. And with that being a guiding principle for all of us to remind ourselves, right? So whether you are of the mindset or the idea or the belief that we are all interconnected, we all have quantum entanglements, all is one, one is all. I kind of delved into that in the energy chords video in of itself. And yeah, just whether you subscribe to that model or not, or say the 6 degrees of separation or anything like that, we all happen to be interrelated and interconnected, whether we realize it consciously or not. Hence, these different sorts of pain bodies existing within the subconscious, superconscious, what have you. Now, in going ahead and having that album drop today on May the 13th and discussing the pain body and all these sorts of things, while I was going ahead and putting all the information together, go ahead and talk about it here, it actually occurred to me that in 3 days' time, on May the 16th, we're going to be having ourselves a lunar eclipse in Scorpio. And for that, right, essentially, right, the album in of itself delved into the ego, and it goes through Kendrick pretty much going through therapy and having different sessions, in a sense, with the tracks, that being a loose narrative throughout. And it aligns with what the purpose of this lunar eclipse is going to be the astrological significance of it. The chaotic Scorpio, governed by Pluto, uncovers the deep ills and repressed traumas people have. In the words of writer David Odyssey for the publication Nylon, in the brief moments of alignment, the sun's radiance, symbolizing the ego and all that is immediately visible to the outside world, courses through the earth and onto the moon, the domain of the internal and invisible. The moon carries our history in the vastness of our inner lives. Exposed directly by the sun's light, Luna reveals the truth in sudden and terrifying clarity. So, being that at the time of this recording, once again, is less than a day since the album came out, and going to be several days before the actual lunar eclipse. For those who are wishing to go ahead and utilize that, or are want that energy, or are wanting to interact with it, that is the purpose. That is what to look forward to in terms of themes, and also another previous video made for a channel on February 22nd, 2022, or 2/22/2022. It happened to be that was the I believe the Pluto return going on, and Scorpio is ruled by which planet? Pluto. So it's just interesting how those correlations occur and those through lines happening of like, oh yes, we're going to be going ahead and uncovering quite a bit of shit as, a collective humanity and all that, for better and or for worse, who knows. But yeah, at the latter part right there, when it's kind of talking about the lunar eclipse, I don't know whether you guys were able to hear that dog barking or not, but hopefully not. If you did, then, I appreciate you sticking around and bearing through that. But yeah, I think I pretty much went ahead and covered all that I wanted to go ahead and express with this. So, with all that said, this is Twisted with the Opener Sorcery, and stay frosty, Neguses. Peace.